Kronos Timekeeper training video. For a printable step-by-step direction, see the Kronos Timekeeper guide. Please note that this video and the Kronos Timekeeper guide complement each other, and both should be consulted for how to complete your timekeeper tasks. The adoption of Kronos employee self-service over the last several years has led to changes in how Kronos timekeeping is done. Prior to the implementation of Kronos UKG Ready in August 2020, only timekeepers, approvers, and a small number of employees, primarily classified supervisors, had access to Kronos. This is because there were a limited number of licenses. Accordingly, it was necessary for timekeepers or approvers to enter absences, missed punches, and similar requests into Kronos on employees' behalf. Also, employees could not access their own timesheets or print them. Instead, they had to ask for the timekeeper or approver to print it for them. However, after August 2020, all employees whose time is kept in Kronos could now access Kronos using a computer, smartphone, or tablet. This opened up some opportunities to empower employees. Now, employees can access and/or print their own Kronos timesheet whenever they wish. More significantly, they also now submit within Kronos requests for time off, missed punches, canceled lunches, and the like. These developments have led to changes in how timekeepers do their Kronos tasks. Now there is less data entry, and there is more checking to see if employees have submitted requests and follow up with those employees who have not submitted requests. In this video, we'll look at what timekeepers do. And the start time of the video clips of the different topics are listed for your reference. Timekeepers regularly review employee timesheets for exceptions and take follow-up steps. They directly edit employee timesheets to correct mistaken punch interpretations, double punches, and other errors. Timekeepers in schools correct time off entries which come over into Kronos incorrectly from Red Rover, or enter time off entries which failed to come over into Kronos from Red Rover. Timekeepers also enter excused paid for district early closure days for staff working such days who are excused from working either the last hour or half hour of their regular schedules. Timekeepers in schools enter school-wide calamity day entries. In addition, all timekeepers review employee timesheets at the end of the pay period. They account for employees' scheduled hours per week, and they inform approvers that the time cards are ready for their review and approval. Additionally, they check employees' profiles in Kronos to ensure that they have schedules listed and that the schedules are correct. And they add or adjust an employee's schedule and/or lunch length as needed. They also answer basic questions from employees about using Kronos. So before we consider those topics, we'll briefly consider what a timekeeper must not do. If you have access to edit your own timesheet, never use this access to edit your own timesheet in any of the following ways. Never add or change punches to your own timesheet. Never cancel or change a lunch deduction for your own timesheet. Never add time worked, such as remote work or staff development, for your timesheet. And with only a few exceptions, as noted in the Kronos Timekeeper guide, generally, never add time off to your own timesheet. Instead, follow the directions in the Employee Kronos Guide for reporting your absences, missed punches, remote work, and requesting lunch break cancellations, and the like.
Regularly review employee timesheets for missed punch and missed day exceptions. For each such exception, check to see if the employee has submitted a request which, when approved by the Kronos approver, would clear the exception. Let's first look at where you can locate timesheet exceptions and pending requests. That is to say, requests which have been submitted by employees but have not yet been approved or rejected by Kronos approvers. On your screen, under the Manager Self-Service tab, timesheet exceptions are listed below the box Timesheets Awaiting My Approval. The exceptions box on the left side are exceptions for the current pay period. The exceptions box on the right side are for the previous pay period. You would use the box on the right side on the Monday following the end of the pay period. You can click on the word exceptions to open the report. It's the same information, but in an easier to read format. To go back to the previous screen, You can either click the UKG logo or the back button next to exceptions. You can export the exceptions into an Excel spreadsheet by clicking the three dots on the right-hand side and then clicking Export. Uncheck the box for Display Header Footer and export the file as Excel 2007, and then click Export and it will generate the file. Pending timesheet change requests are located directly below the exceptions boxes. These requests may include add punch in requests for missed punches in, add punch out requests for missed punches out, and add time entry requests for when someone missed both a punch in and a punch out for the same day, and add time entry requests to report remote work or off-site professional development. There may be other timesheet requests in this area, such as for canceled lunches or the conversion of overtime or time worked on a calamity day to comp time. But these other requests don't directly relate to clearing exceptions, so we won't consider them here. Pending time off requests are located below the pending timesheet change request box. The report heading reads all open. So now that we've gone over navigation, let's revisit the topic. Why should you as a timekeeper be interested in employee exceptions? Because you need to see if the employee addressed each exception by submitting either a change request or a time off request. If not, you want to remind them to do so. Let's look at some examples of matching exceptions to requests. You can track your matching of exceptions to requests using pen and paper, Excel, or whatever other method you wish. In this example, I'm going to use Excel. The first thing I'm going to do is export the exceptions list to an Excel file and then save it. Next, I'm going to put a couple headers here. And these headers and the information I put in here will help me to keep track of what I've done in regards to each of these exceptions. So the first exception we're looking at is for Judith Ainsworth for 9/16/24, and it's a missed punch. A missed punch exception can be matched to either a timesheet change request for an add punch in or an add punch out. Under pending timesheet change requests, I see an add punch out request for Judith Ainsworth for 9/16/24. So I simply note the employee has submitted a request, which will clear the exception when approved. The next exception is for 9/18/24 for Judith Ainsworth for a missed punch. And here I see two requests for an add punch out for 9/18/24. And these requests are for the same punch out time of 3:16 p.m. The approver will only be able to approve one of these requests. The approver must reject the duplicate request. So I tell the principal to approve one request and reject the other. In this box, I note that the employee has submitted a request and also make a note of what I told the principal. Judith Ainsworth also has a missed punch for 9/19/24. When I look at the pending timesheet change requests, I don't see any add punch in or add punch out requests for 9/19/24. I therefore remind her to submit a request. She notes that she already has submitted a request. However, I note to her that she submitted two requests for 9/18, and possibly she meant one of those to be for 9/19. However, she'll need to submit one for 9/19. She agrees to do so. I note that I've reminded the employee to submit a request. Judith Ainsworth also has a missed punch for 9/20/24 and 9/23/24. There are add punch out requests for both dates, so I note the employee has submitted the requests. The next employee with exceptions is Ashton Cowie. He has a missed punch exception on 9/16/24. I have to scroll down a little bit under pending timesheet change requests to see his request. And here I see that he submitted an add punch in request for 9/16/24. So I note the employee has submitted the request. Ashton Cowie also has a missed day exception on 9/19/24. There is an add time entry request for Ashton for 9/19. In this add time entry request, Ashton reported the time he started work for the day, 7:30 a.m., and the time he ended work for the day, 4 p.m. So I note the employee has submitted the request, which, when approved, will clear the missed day exception. Ashton County also has a missed day exception on 9/23/24. There are no other timesheet change requests for Ashton County for that date, so I look under time off request for approval, and I see that he has submitted a time off request for that day, which, when approved, will clear the missed day exception. So I note he submitted a request. Layla Rivers has a missed punch exception on 9/23/24. There is no add punch in or out request submitted by Layla for 9/23. So I email her to remind her to submit a request. She emails back that she's out of the country now and for the next week to attend a funeral and is unable to access Kronos to submit a missed punch request. But she notes that she left work for that day at 3 p.m. Because she can't access Kronos to submit a request, I forward her note on to the principal with a request for an OK to add her requested punch to her timesheet. The principal emails me back it's okay to add, so I add the punch to her timesheet. I do so by clicking the open timesheet or the pencil icon next to the exception for her. And I scroll down and I enter 3 for 3 p.m. and click Save. Next, I attach the email from the principal noting it's okay to add the employee's punch to her timesheet. And I do so by clicking the paperclip icon, clicking Choose, and then I select the note, and then I scroll down and click Upload and click Close. And now that note is attached, which has the principal's approval to add that punch. To go back to the main screen, I click UKG, and I scroll down, and I see that Layla's exception is now gone because I've added the punch. The next exception is for Lorna Sharp for 9/23/24 for a missed punch. Here I see under change requests an add punch in request for Lorna for 9/23/24. So I note that Lorna has submitted her request. So the final two exceptions are two missed day exceptions for Jack Valance for 9/18/24 and 9/23/24. I look and I see that there are no add time entries or time off requests for Jack Valance for these days. In this example, Jack works at a school and uses Red Rover to report his absences. So I check Red Rover to see if he reported his absences there and possibly that they just didn't come over into Kronos. I see that he reported both absences in Red Rover, noting personal illness, and for some reason the absences didn't come over into his Kronos timesheet as they normally should. Because the employee has reported his absence in the system, I can use that information to update his Kronos timesheet. To update his timesheet, I go back to the exceptions area, click the open timesheet or pencil icon next to one of the exceptions, and then I scroll down, and here I'll add the same absence type and amount that Jack Valance reported in Red Rover. So in this case, it's 8 hours, and under time off, personal illness. And I click the little notes icon and I note the Red Rover absence number and click Save. And now I'll do the same thing for the other absence. Once again, I'll click the note in the notes area and note the Red Rover absence number. Then I click Save. And I click the back button, and Jack Valance's missed day exceptions are gone as well. And I just note what I did with those exceptions added to timesheet. So those are some examples of how to systematically go through exceptions and match them to timesheet change requests, time off requests, or in less common circumstances to Red Rover absences. So let's review this section. A missed punch exception can be matched to either a timesheet change request for an add punch in or an add punch out. A missed day exception can be matched to either a timesheet change request for an add time entry or a time off request. It's important to document the adding of punches that you make directly to an employee's timesheet. If you add a punch to a timesheet because the employee is unable to submit a missed punch request using Kronos, you must add the employee's written request to add the punch, whether that request was made by email or on paper, along with the Kronos approver's OK to add the request to the employee's Kronos timesheet. This provides backup documentation for the added punch. This particular slide generally just applies to schools or to a small number of departmental employees who use Red Rover. If an employee has reported an absence in Red Rover, and that absence didn't come over into their Kronos timesheet as it normally should come across, add the time off directly to the employee's Kronos timesheet just as it's listed in Red Rover. Instead of adding an attachment as backup documentation, simply note the Red Rover absence number in the comment field. See the School Timekeepers Guide for additional instructions on what to do if you cannot add to Kronos the same exact absence type as listed in Red Rover. If you see pending requests for a pay period which are not approved by the Monday morning after the end of the pay period, please remind your Kronos approver to approve these requests before approving employees' timesheets. Otherwise, the approver will get a lot of errors when trying to approve the employees' timesheets and will not be able to approve those timesheets.
Part of this training has talked about timesheet edits you should not make. However, there are times when you do need to directly edit an employee's timesheet. You'll need to directly edit a timesheet to correct mistaken punch interpretations, to correct double punches, and to correct clear and obvious punch in, punch out errors made by employees. An example of a mistaken punch interpretation is shown here on Monday, August 19th. The in punch, 7:30 a.m., is listed in the to column when it should be in the from column. This is also causing the out punch, 4 p.m., to be mistakenly listed in the from column. In this example, to correct this error, click the clock icon next to the punch you wish to correct. In this case, 7:30 a.m. The punches are reordered correctly, then click Save. Next, we'll look at how to fix a double punch. A double punch most often happens because an employee forgets they clocked in for the day, and so they clock in a second time. In this example, on Thursday, August 22nd, the employee punched in at 7:30 a.m., then punched in again at 7:45 a.m. because they didn't remember if they had clocked in for the day, and then punched out at 4 p.m. This resulted in a couple of bad things. First, they're only getting credit for 15 minutes of worked time. Second, they have a missed punch exception. In these cases, verify with the employee what they think happened and then edit their timesheet accordingly. In this example, to correct this, select the real out punch, in this case 4 p.m., by using your mouse and triple clicking it. Then right-click your mouse and select Cut. Then select the second in punch, the bogus double punch, by using your mouse to triple click it. Then right-click your mouse and select Paste. Then click the 3 dots on the second row and then select Delete. Finally, click Save. You may also need to directly edit a timesheet to correct an obvious punch-in, punch-out error made by an employee. We'll look at an example of this for Thursday, August 29th. In this example, the employee had an in punch of 7:30 a.m., which is correct, but had no out punch. So what they do is they submit a timesheet change request for a missed punch and submit it to their approver. But in this scenario, they select 4, but do not specify PM, so it defaults to AM. Notice what happens after the approver approves this request. It shows an in punch of 4 a.m. and an out punch of 7:30 a.m. Clearly, the employee intended for this to be 4 p.m. So how to correct this error? First of all, click the clock icon next to 7:30 a.m. Then click the AM icon in the 4 a.m. field to change it to PM. Then click the clock icon next to 4 p.m. Then select 7:30 a.m. by triple clicking it using your mouse. Right-click your mouse and select Cut, then click in the From field on the first row, right-click your mouse and select Paste. And finally, click the 3 dots on the second row and click Delete, and then click Save. You may also need to directly edit an employee's timesheet to correct any time off entries, which came into Kronos from Red Rover with incorrect amounts. and also to enter any time off entries which fail to come into Kronos from Red Rover.
At times, Red Rover may send over an incorrect amount. The reason for this usually is that Red Rover is using the bell schedule for the school instead of the employee's schedule as listed in Kronos. So let's say that this occurred for this employee here on Wednesday, October 19th. And instead of sending over 8 hours for that day, it only sent over 7. Well, how do you as the timekeeper fix that? In this case, you would change the amount from 7 to 8 and then click Save.
Occasionally, Red Rover may not send over a time off record to Kronos. How to fix? Because the employee already reported their absence using Red Rover, it's not necessary for the employee to report their absence a second time using Kronos. Rather, as a timekeeper, you can directly edit the employee's timesheet to add the same absence type and amount the employee reported in Red Rover if there is a sufficient balance in the employee's Kronos accruals. However, if there isn't a sufficient balance and there are no other appropriate paid accrual balances to use, then select the appropriate unpaid time off type. In this example, the employee entered an absence for 8 hours of personal illness in Red Rover for Friday, August 30th. The absence didn't come over into the employee's Kronos timesheet. To fix this, click the down arrow under time off type for the record that you wish to edit, in this case 8:30. Click Browse. There is more than one page to browse, so if you don't see the time off type you need to enter, click the right facing arrow to go to the next page of options. Click the button next to the time off type you wish to use. In this case, I'm selecting personal illness. Then enter the amount of time in the raw total column for that day. In this case, 8 hours. Click the comment icon for the record and note Red Rover absence. And then click Save. And then click Save again to save the timesheet.
You will also need to directly edit a timesheet to add excused paid for early dismissals. You would add excused paid for 1/2 hour early dismissal on the last school day before winter break and the last school day before spring break for building substitutes and CSEA bargaining unit employees in school buildings working such days, except for custodians. Directly edit a timesheet to add excused paid for 1 hour early dismissal on the days before Thanksgiving break, Christmas break, New Year's break, and 4th of July break for employees at all district sites working such days. Please note that Kronos staff do not add these entries. Timekeepers or approvers must enter these entries into employees' timesheets as appropriate. Here are some other guidelines regarding the use of excused paid for these early dismissals and in general. Don't use excused paid for employees who did not work on early closure days. That is, they were absent. The amount of excused paid entered shouldn't exceed 1/2 hour for school early dismissals or 1 hour for district early dismissals. The amount of excused paid entered plus time worked for a day should not exceed an employee's standard hours per day. And a few examples of this. If an employee worked 7.25 hours for a day, which has a 1 hour early release, the timekeeper should enter 0.75 hours of excused paid, not 1 hour, so that the employee's paid time for the day does not exceed 8 hours. If an employee worked 8.5 hours for a day, which has a 1 hour early release, the timekeeper shouldn't enter any excused paid time, since the employee's time worked for the day exceeded 8 hours. Don't use excused paid for any days other than early closure days or as directed by the Kronos area of the Treasurer's Office. The first example we'll look at is a 1/2 hour early dismissal on the last school day before winter break for an 8-hour-a-day employee in a school building working on that day. So in this example, we'll look at Friday, December 20th. The employee worked from 7:15 to 3:15, a half hour less than their normal time. They have a calculated total of 7.5 hours. To add the excuse paid for 1/2 hour, click the plus symbol under the time for December 20th in this example. Enter 0.5 in the raw total column. Click the down arrow in the time off column. Click Browse. Scroll down until you see Excuse Paid, and then click the button next to Excuse Paid to select it, and then click Save. The second example we'll look at is the 1-hour dismissal on the day before Christmas break for an 8-hour-a-day employee at a district site working that day. So the example we'll look at here is for Monday, December 23rd. The employee has 7 hours of worked time for the day. To add the excuse paid for 1 hour for that day, click the plus symbol in the raw total area, enter 1, then click the down arrow in the time off column. Here I've previously selected excuse paid, so it's available as an option. So I simply click it here and then click save. Otherwise, you would have to click browse and then select it. The employee now has 8 hours in the calculated total for that day. The third and final example we'll look at is the 1-hour dismissal on the day before New Year's break for an 8-hour-a-day employee at a district site working that day. So here we're looking at Tuesday, December 31st. And in this example, the employee worked 7 hours and 45 minutes. To add the excuse paid, click the plus arrow underneath the time worked for that day. And here, instead of entering 1 hour, which would give the employee 8 hours and 45 minutes of work time for the day, enter 0.25. And only 0.25 hours of excuse paid is added in order for the employee's total paid time for the day to equal but not exceed 8 hours. In the time off area, click the down arrow, select excuse paid if it's available, or click browse, and then select excuse paid, and then click save.
We'll now look at how to handle calamity day entries. These are handled in 2 different ways depending on the type of calamity day. First, let's consider district-wide calamity days. Kronos staff, not you as a timekeeper, will add the calamity day entries to employees' timesheets when a district-wide calamity day is proclaimed. However, in cases where there is not a district-wide calamity day, but rather there are 1 or more schools which are closed due to a calamity at those locations, such as a utility failure, timekeepers at the closed schools must add the calamity day entries to employees' timesheets. We'll now look at how to add a calamity day entry. In this example, there was a calamity day on Wednesday, August 28th. Click the down arrow in the time off area for the day on which there was a calamity day. Select Browse, and then click the time off calamity pay. In the raw total area, enter the standard hours per day for that employee, in this case, 8 hours, and then click Save. Review each employee's timesheet at the end of each pay period. Account for each employee's scheduled hours per week. Approvers must review and approve time cards by 11:59 p.m. of the Monday following a pay date. Your final review of timesheets needs to occur after the end of the pay period, but prior to when the approver approves the timesheets. Most timekeepers complete their final review on the Monday morning following a pay date. You and your approver can determine by what time your review of the employee's timesheets needs to occur, but it should be completed with sufficient work time left on Monday so that the approver has time to approve the timesheets.
We'll now look at an example of a timekeeper reviewing timesheets. For training purposes, a number of different timesheet scenarios will be shown. The following example of reviewing timesheets is shown from the perspective of a timekeeper reviewing timesheets on the Monday morning following the end of a pay period. First, after logging into Kronos, click the Approver Checklist tab. The Approver Checklist displays the steps approvers need to take in order to approve their employees' Kronos timesheets. These steps include approving or rejecting each time off request and timesheet change requests. An employee's timesheet cannot be approved if an employee has any outstanding Kronos requests for the pay period or any missed punch exceptions. As you scroll down the approval checklist, if you see any time off requests, there are none listed here at the top, or timesheet change requests, and those would be located in the box second from the top, and there is one here, please remind the approver to follow the steps in their Kronos guide for approving each and every such request. However, after reminding the approver, continue with your timesheet review. Your timesheet review doesn't have to wait until the approver approves all requests. Start your review of timesheets by scrolling to the very bottom of the Approver Checklist page. Then click All Timesheets. This report will show timesheets for the previous pay period for all employees for whom you are listed as timekeeper, whose timesheets have not yet been approved, and who have total paid and unpaid hours greater than 0, excluding unpaid unscheduled days, which aren't included. To look at each employee timesheet one by one, click the box icon here on the top left, right under Page, select All on Page, and then click the View button. And here you'll be able to go through each timesheet by using the arrows. Next, click the Summary by Day tab. You'll look at the Summary by Day tab for each employee. What you're looking at here is that you're checking the weekly calc totals. So the calc total column, weekly totals, weekly total 1, weekly total number 2. Determine if each week's calc totals are less than the employee's standard hours per day multiplied by 5. In other words, the standard hours per week. For most employees, this is 40 hours per week. For building substitute teachers, it's 35 hours, and so on. The first employee we're looking at is an instructional assistant. The employee had 40 hours in the calc total area for the first week, as shown here, and 32 for the second week. We see that there's no calc total for Monday, October 7th. To look into this more, I click the Time Entry tab and scroll down to that particular day. And here I see the issue is apparently a mistaken punch interpretation. To fix this mistaken punch interpretation, I click the clock icon here, and then I click Save. And I see that the calculated total at the top of the page is now 80 hours. I scroll back also, and I see that the calc total for each week is 40 hours, and there are no longer any incomplete entries listed in the Summary by Day tab. So I click the right arrow to go to the next timesheet, and here the next employee is the timekeeper herself, Lorna Sharp. She sees that she has sufficient hours in each of the weekly calc total columns, 41:45 for the first week and 40 hours, 15 minutes for the second week. So there is no follow-up needed as far as short hours. Clicks the right arrow to go to the next timesheet. And now she's looking at the building sub, Layla Rivers. Layla has 35 hours and 15 minutes for the first week. It's slightly over the 35-hour standard week for a building sub. But in the second week, there's only 28 hours. So she's short 7 hours. To look at this further, she clicks Monday, October 7th, and it takes her to that particular day that she has a question about. And here I see that there's a missed day. The next step regarding this missed day exception is to go back out of this report and see if there are any time off requests or timesheet change requests that, when approved, would clear that exception. And here I see that there, in fact, is a timesheet change request by Layla for 10/7 for a start time of 8 o'clock, an end time of 3:30 for a total of 7 hours when taking out the lunch. So this entry, when approved, will bring her up to her required amount of hours. So now I go back to the report by scrolling all the way down, clicking all timesheets again, clicking the checkbox, selecting all on page, clicking view. And now I use the right arrow to go to the next employee, Jenny Ramsharan. I click the Summary by Day tab, and here I see that for the first week, there's a calc total of 40 hours and 45 minutes. So there's no shortage there. But I scroll down and I see that on Tuesday, October 8th, there is no calc total. And so there's only 32 hours for that week. I click that particular day, Tuesday, October 8th, to get a better look at it. And here I see that there's a missed punch exception. Next thing I want to do is check to see if the employee has submitted a missed punch request. So I go back out to the approval checklist, and I scroll down and I verify once again that there is no missed punch request from this employee. I check my records, and this is an employee I followed up several times with to submit a missed punch request, but they haven't yet done so. Because there's nothing more I can do in regards to that timesheet, I simply note that I'll inform the principal of my follow-up efforts with the employee and let them know that the timesheet cannot be approved unless or until the employee submits the request. So I scroll back down to the bottom of the report. I click all timesheets, click the all on page again, click view, and I go to the next on the list, which is Ashton Cowan. Now, Ashton is a 4-hour-a-day instructional assistant, so his standard hours per week is 20 hours. I note that for the first week, the employee only has 19 hours, so they're 1 hour short. On the second week, they have 20 hours and 15 minutes, so there is no shortage for the second week. To look at the shortage on the first week, I click one of the entries. And here I see that there is a sick leave absence for 3 hours and 30 minutes for both of those days. If I click the comment, I see that those came over from Red Rover. What I do in this situation is I check Red Rover to see what the employee requested. When I check Red Rover, I see that they, in fact, requested the whole day, which for them is 4 hours, but that it came into Kronos with only 3 hours and 30 minutes. So in this case, since the amount was correctly recorded in Red Rover and it came over differently into Kronos, I simply change the amount in Kronos to match Red Rover. So 4 hours for each of those days. And because the reference to Red Rover is already in the comment field, I don't even need to update that because it matches Red Rover. I just go up and click save to save the changes. And now the employee has their correct amount of hours listed for personal illness for each day. Now, the reason why a lesser amount of hours sometimes comes over for 4-hour-a-day employees is sometimes because they have a lunch listed in Kronos. So I click the employee's name, and then I scroll down. And here I see that there's a default lunch break of 30 minutes. Well, since they're a 4-hour-a-day employee, they don't take a lunch break. So I can change that from 30 to 0, click save. And now their schedule in Kronos will be updated, and that will affect how their absence is brought in from Red Rover. So future absences for a full day will be brought in with the correct amount of hours, 4 hours for each day. So we'll look at the final employee by clicking the right arrow and click the Summary by Day tab. And this employee is a 40-hour-a-week instructional assistant. So for the first week, there's only 38 hours and 15 minutes. So he's short 1 hour and 45 minutes. And the second week, it's the full amount, 40 hours. So there's not an issue there. So to look at this issue a little further, I see that the shortage is on a particular day, Wednesday, October 2nd. I click that day, and here I see that there's a late punch-in of 9:30, and that's why there is less time for that day. I've already verified that there are no requests in the time off area or in the timesheet change requests area other than Layla Rivers. And in this scenario, I check Red Rover to see if there's possibly an absence that didn't come over for this employee. There was no absence entry for the employee in Red Rover for that day. So I communicate with the approver about this, and the approver emails back that the employee was unexcused late that day and to use AWOL. So to make that entry, I click the plus arrow. I enter 1.75 or 1:45. Under time off, click the down arrow and then click browse and select AWOL. And then I click save. And very importantly, to show backup documentation for why I used AWOL, I save the principal's email noting the approval to use AWOL, and then I click this paperclip icon for supporting documents. Click choose. I select the saved AWOL note from the principal. Then I click upload, and then I click close. And now there's supporting documentation for why I entered AWOL for that particular day. And then I click save and click the UKG logo to go back to the approver checklist. And I scroll all the way down. And at this point, I've concluded my review of the employee timesheets. I let the principal or approver know of the remaining issues, and I've completed my work for the pay period. So that's an example of how to do a timesheet review shortly after the end of a pay period in advance of the principal or approver approving the Kronos timesheets.
To change an employee's schedule, from the main dashboard, click the 3 horizontal lines next to the UKG logo. Next, type in their employee ID, then click on the employee name that appears. From there, click on the Profiles tab, which is written vertically, and scroll down to the bottom where it shows Work Schedule. In this example, the employee wants to change from 8 hours a day of a start time at 7 a.m. and an end time of 3:30 p.m. with a 30-minute lunch to 8 hours a day with a start time of 7:30 a.m., an end time of 4:30 p.m., and a 60-minute lunch. To make that change, click the Browse button, which is the magnifying glass on the piece of paper. You see a number of selections. These are mostly done in sequential order based on the number of hours in a day as a starting point. To see all the rows for all the schedules, click on the page icon, select the maximum of 200. You'll see all the available schedules. Then scroll down until you see the schedule that the employee has requested and it's been approved by their manager. In making this change, there's also a change in lunch length. It went from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. To also reflect that there's been a change in lunch length, there's another area that needs to be addressed. So in their employee profile screen, as you scroll down, and in the cost centers area above the accruals area, you'll see default lunch break. There you can click Browse after clicking the down arrow and select the lunch break that the employee has requested for the current day and going forward. Then click Save. In the example that we're using, the employee has requested the change at the beginning of the pay period. So they requested it and had it approved back on January 24th, but we're just getting to entering it into Kronos today, which is January 28th. So they've already started working that schedule. So you can see in their calculated total, they're getting 8.5 hours, and that the lunch break is still listed as 30 minutes. Now for the current day, the schedule is correct, shows it as 8 hours, correct start and end time. The lunch break has not yet changed. If we look into the future days, the schedule is correct and the lunch break is correct. So those won't need changed in the future. But how about changing past schedule entries for a timesheet which has not yet been approved? Well, to do so, click on the schedule link, and then under Shift Type, click the down arrow, then select the schedule that you'd like, then click Save. You'll notice that doing so, even after clicking Save for the timesheet, doesn't change the calculated total because the lunch break is still listed as 30 minutes. So to do that, click in the lunch break area, select 60, and then Save. And now it changes it to the correct calculated total of 8 hours. In this example, all the days need that change. Simply go through, make that change, even for the current day, so that when the person swipes out, they'll have the correct lunch break length. Click Save, and then correct the remaining schedule entries. Now after clicking Save, you'll see that for these 4 days, the calculated totals are correct. 8 hours, the lunch break length is what the employee has requested and the manager has approved. And then for future days, the schedule and lunch break length are set going forward based on what we entered in the employee profile.
We'll now have a brief review of some of the significant changes from previous timekeeper guidance. Kronos self-service should be used to correct missed punches. However, if a timekeeper enters a missed punch on an employee's behalf, they must upload to Kronos the approver's approval of the missed punch. Timekeepers shouldn't edit their own timesheet to add punches, cancel lunch deductions, or add time worked. When editing other employees' timesheets, they should follow the directions in this training and the Kronos Timekeeper Guide. If a timekeeper doesn't follow the directions noted in this training, as well as the Kronos Timekeeper Guide, their Kronos Timekeeper permissions may be restricted or removed by the Kronos staff. Account for employees' scheduled hours per week and take steps to address any shortfalls. Regularly check employees' profiles in Kronos to ensure they have schedules listed, and add schedules or edit schedules as needed. If an absence was unexcused, then with the approver's approval, enter the absence in Kronos as AWOL. Attach the approver's approval for use of AWOL to the timesheet. For school employees who use Red Rover, if the absence was unexcused and the absence didn't come over from Red Rover as an unexcused absence, then with the approver's approval, enter the absence in Kronos as AWOL. Attach the approver's approval for use of AWOL to the timesheet. For help with login issues, contact the IT help desk at 8425. If an employee's Kronos timesheet needs corrected after a pay period has been locked in Kronos, and timesheets are locked on the Wednesday after the end of a pay period, the approver, not you as a timekeeper, must email the corrections to the appropriate payroll clerk, not Kronos. For Kronos questions or assistance, please feel free to contact kronos@columbus.k12.oh.us.